He noticed how the service dog started acting strangely around the pregnant woman, Dot. But the discovery in her bag shocked him. Don't forget to subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The morning began as they all did, under a dull sky that stretched endlessly above Red Ridge International Airport. The clouds hung low, pressing the gray light into the concrete, dulling colors and muting sound until everything seemed to hum at one low, exhausted frequency. Wind pressed lightly against the terminal's glass walls, not enough to stir alarm, but enough to feel present, like the world was waiting for something to happen. Inside, the terminal buzzed with the usual rhythm of travel, rattling suitcase wheels, soft murmurs in multiple languages, children tugging at parents' sleeves, overhead announcements glitching in and out of clarity. Alex Rayner walked his patrol route the way he always did, measured, silent, present, but not intrusive. His posture was that of a man who knew the rules, but no longer felt attached to enforcing them. The standard transportation security officer uniform fit snugly across his shoulders, dark navy against his pale skin, with the patch on his right arm just beginning to fray at the edge. He wore a beard trimmed to the point of indifference and eyes that had seen more nuance than policy allowed. Every step beside him, padded in rhythm, was Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd trained for scent detection. Unlike most working dogs, Max bore a look of quiet patience. No barking, no panting, just a constant, silent alertness that mirrored his handler. Their path curved along Terminal C's main corridor, near the wide span of gates where arriving passengers trickled out like water through uneven stone. Rayner scanned the flow of faces with practiced apathy. Not boredom. No, boredom was what he used to feel. This was something different, something deeper, the kind of detachment that settles in when a man has spent too long trying not to be noticed. The incident from 6 years ago still hung in the back of his mind like mildew in drywall. A simple search, a routine pull-aside. He had acted by the book, and yet the result had spiraled into a headline. The passenger, a young black man on his way to a tech conference, had gone viral with a video clip of Rayner asking him to remove his shoes twice. Racial profiling, the caption had screamed. Investigations followed. A temporary suspension. A second chance in a lesser role. The federal track, gone. In time, the noise died down, but the stain remained. Even now, years later, every time he reached for the radio, every time he followed a hunch, that same thought pulsed beneath the surface. What if this is the one that ruins me again? Max gave a slight tug on the leash. It was subtle, a shift in gait, a change in his breathing. Rayner knew every variation in the dog's behavior. This wasn't a false positive or distraction. Max had locked onto something. His ears stiffened. His snout dipped, searching the air, then rose. The dog slowed as they passed the curve of Gate C-17. Rayner's gaze followed Max's line of attention. Among the travelers moving through the crowd, one woman stood out. Not because she demanded it, but because everything about her seemed deliberately muted. She was black, visibly pregnant, wearing a dark wool coat over a plain white blouse stretched across her belly. Her shoes were simple, flat. Her sunglasses too large for the cloudy day. She carried 2 plastic grocery bags instead of luggage, one in each hand, as though she'd packed in a hurry or had nowhere else to stow her things. Max's tail stiffened. His body lowered into a semi-crouch, not aggressive, but alert. Rayner felt the old tension rise in his gut. He exhaled slowly and gave the leash a soft tug to bring Max back to heel. But the dog resisted slightly, eyes still locked on the woman. She moved at a deliberate pace, not fast, not slow, balanced. Her face, what little of it he could see beneath the oversized glasses, bore no signs of distress, no visible indicators of threat. But Max didn't let up. Rayner hesitated. Protocol dictated that any sustained canine alert required a secondary screening. His fingers hovered near the radio mic clipped to his collar. But hesitation rooted him. She was black. She was pregnant. She was carrying nothing that resembled conventional contraband. And he was him. The man with a history of making people uncomfortable, of getting it wrong. His thumb slid away from the mic. Instead, he shifted position and followed at a slow, parallel angle, watching from a measured distance. She didn't look around, didn't adjust her stride, but there was something odd. The way she kept her chin slightly lowered, the way she gripped the bags, not tightly but deliberately, with purpose. Nothing about her felt casual. Everything was intentional. Max let out a low whine. Rayner knelt briefly, pretending to adjust the dog's harness. He whispered under his breath, more to himself than to the dog, "What are you picking up?" Max's ears twitched. His tail made a slow arc. The woman reached the center of the corridor. A stream of passengers passed around her like a river splitting at a rock. She stopped momentarily, shifting one bag to the crook of her arm to brush a loose curl behind her ear. That was when it happened. The right bag slipped from her hand. Plastic struck tile, a muffled thud. The contents spilled, not loudly but enough to draw attention. A wrapped object slid across the floor, knocking into a row of chair legs. It was oblong, wrapped in layers of crinkled silver foil held by tape. Something inside clinked faintly. Max barked once, sharp, piercing, the kind of bark that wasn't trained. It wasn't a command or a warning. It was instinct. Rayner froze. People turned. The woman bent quickly to gather the bag, but not with panic, with precision. She knew what had fallen. She moved not like someone hiding, but someone calculating. He was moving before he realized it. One hand raised slightly, the other reaching for his badge. His voice even, measured. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me for a moment." She turned slowly. No panic in her eyes, just fatigue. And maybe something else. Something deeper. Resignation. She nodded once. As she stood, her breathing shifted. Rayner noticed it. A faint tightening in the chest, a wince. She pressed her hand against her side and took one step, then another. And then she collapsed. The fall was not violent, but it was total. Her body folded inward, knees buckling, arms instinctively curling around her stomach. The bags hit the floor again. One tore. An envelope slid out, yellow, sealed. A stuffed bear tumbled free, landing on its side beside her. For a moment, the entire terminal seemed to stop breathing. Rayner dropped beside her, fingers already moving to his radio. "Medical emergency, Terminal C, main corridor. Pregnant woman collapsed, unconscious. Request immediate medics." Max barked again, now pacing around her in small, frantic circles. The crowd was forming, but no one approached. Rayner checked her breathing. Shallow. Pulse. Weak but steady. He reached out to stabilize her head, then noticed her left hand was clenched. Not tight, but with intention. He gently opened it. Dog tags. Military. Old. Scuffed. A name pressed into metal like an echo. Hollis Rayner. His breath caught. He stared at the name, heart pounding, mind flashing back 20 years through dust and heat and blood. A name he hadn't said aloud since the desert. A name that belonged in the ground. He looked at the woman again. Saw her properly now, the angle of her face, the line of her jaw, the weight behind the eyelids. Impossible. Max stopped barking. He lay down beside her, head low, ears flattened. Rayner picked up the envelope from the floor. It was crumpled slightly, a faint smear of blood on the edge. Across the front, in shaky cursive, "Sorry." This was no accident. No coincidence. The dog tags, the envelope, the fall. Rayner rose as the paramedics arrived, guiding them with terse instructions, but his eyes never left the envelope in his hand. Whatever was inside, it wasn't meant for anyone else. And yet, here it was, delivered to him, at his feet, like a ghost refusing to stay buried. Later, in the dim light of the break room, alone with the envelope and the weight of a name he had tried to forget, Rayner sat motionless. Max lay at his side, still attentive. With hands that remembered too much, he opened the seal. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means I failed to keep my promise." He read it again and again. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his brother's. And with that, the past opened its jaws. The air in the break room was too bright, the flickering fluorescent lights humming in a relentless rhythm that scraped at Rayner's nerves. He sat at the table, unmoving, the opened letter in front of him, its creased edges trembling slightly from the draft sneaking under the door. Max lay at his feet, head on his paws, eyes fixed on him in quiet expectation. The dog, like him, was waiting for something, an instruction, a decision, a sign that the world still made sense. But it didn't. Not anymore. The letter, written in Hollis's hand, no doubt about it, told a story that defied every certainty Alex Rayner had clung to since that final mission 2 decades ago. A mission that had left more questions than closure. A mission that took Hollis's life. Only now, it seemed, Hollis hadn't been quite as dead as everyone believed, or at the very least, not as silent. The words on the page swam in front of Rayner's eyes. Hollis had mentioned a woman. Lena, a translator, a civilian, someone he had tried to protect. And then the line that had sucked the air out of Rayner's lungs. She was carrying more than just her past, and I was carrying more than just gear. A daughter. The woman in the terminal. Marlowe. If Lena had been pregnant when Hollis died, if she'd hidden the child, if the timelines aligned, then the pregnant woman who collapsed in his corridor was not just any stranger. She was blood, and if the letter reached her hand, then she had carried it intentionally, which meant she knew more than she'd let on. A knock on the break room door interrupted his spiral. Rayner folded the letter quickly and tucked it back into his coat as Officer Dorian Vale stepped in, his young face creased with unease. "She's awake," Dorian said, "and she's asking for you." Rayner stood without a word, heart pounding, thoughts still tangled. He followed Dorian down the corridor, past vending machines humming with neglect and forgotten terminals dimmed for the night. The walk was slow, deliberate. The world outside the windows had begun to fade into twilight. Rain tapped against the glass. The stillness in the hallway was deceptive. He stopped just outside the clinic room. Through the glass, he saw her, Marlowe, sitting up in bed, pale, exhausted, but alert. She looked younger now, stripped of her sunglasses and coat, hands gripping the hospital blanket like it was a lifeline. Her eyes lifted, their gazes met, and in that moment, a jolt passed through him. He saw Hollis, not in the obvious ways, not in her face or bone structure, but in the weight of her expression, the tension around her mouth, the haunted intelligence in her eyes. He stepped into the room and the silence thickened. Max padded in after him and moved immediately to Marlowe's side, laying his head on the bed beside her. She reached out without hesitation and rested her hand on his fur. No one spoke at first. She watched Rayner with a mixture of wariness and something else, something like expectation. He stood by the door, feeling the distance between them as something more than physical. She spoke first, her voice hoarse but deliberate. "You knew him, didn't you?" Rayner didn't answer immediately. He looked down at Max, then back at her. He didn't need to ask who she meant. "I served with him," he said at last. "Hollis. We were in the same unit, same tour, same dirt." She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already known. "He wrote about you," she said. "Said you were the only one he trusted. Said if anything happened to him, you'd know what to do." Rayner swallowed hard. The words hit like gravel down his throat. He didn't feel worthy of that kind of trust. Not after what happened. Not after the silence he'd wrapped himself in for the past 20 years. Marlowe shifted slightly and reached under her pillow. From it, she pulled another letter. Older, more worn than the one Rayner had read, its edges frayed and paper yellowed. "He wrote this to me," she said, "before I was born." She handed it to him. Her fingers trembled. Rayner took the letter, felt the weight of it in his hand. It felt too heavy to be paper. "I only found it a few weeks ago," she continued, "after my mother passed. She kept it hidden all my life. Said it would only bring pain. Said I'd understand someday." Her voice cracked, and instinctively she pressed a hand to her stomach, protective even now. Rayner sat down in the chair beside the bed and looked at the letter in his hand. He didn't open it. Not yet. "They've been following me," Marlowe said. "I don't know who, but someone tried to break into my apartment. Twice. Didn't take anything, just searched, like they were looking for something." Rayner leaned forward slightly, alert. "Did you contact the police?" "They took a report," she said, "but nothing happened. Nothing ever does." The room fell into a heavy silence. Max let out a soft breath. "That's why I came here," Marlowe said, "to find you, to find out who he really was, and why someone still wants what he left behind." Rayner's thoughts churned. The contents of Hollis's letter echoed in his mind. Hidden files, a flash drive, documents from a covert mission scrubbed from official records. It was supposed to have ended in the desert, buried with Hollis, but if Marlowe carried a letter and others were looking for her, then something had slipped through the cracks. He stood again, moving to the window, staring out into the rain-streaked darkness. "There are things Hollis never told anyone," he said, almost to himself. "Not even me. Things about our last op, about what he found." He turned back to her. "If someone's still after his secrets," he said, "then what he buried didn't stay buried." Marlowe lowered her gaze, hands pressed tightly against her belly. "And now I'm the one carrying it," she whispered. Rayner didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew she wasn't just talking about the child. That night, he returned to his apartment. The letter Marlowe had given him sat unopened on the table under the dull glow of a desk lamp. Max lay by the door, alert even in rest, his ears twitching at every faint sound from the hallway. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Rayner sat for a long time, staring at the letter. He finally opened it just past midnight. The handwriting was rushed and shaky, a man writing as though he were running out of time. "If you're reading this," it began again, "it means I didn't make it. And I'm sorry. Not for dying, for staying silent. Hollis detailed the mission, the detour, the night he went off-grid for 4 hours and came back shaken with blood on his uniform. He'd told no one what he'd done, only that he handed off a satchel to someone from Langley and that it was above Rayner's clearance." Rayner had never asked. He hadn't wanted to know, but now he did. The letter described files, coordinates, names, and a warning. "They told us we recovered weapons," Hollis wrote, "but it wasn't weapons. It was information. Personal, sensitive, evidence." Rayner leaned back in his chair, the letter shaking slightly in his hands. "If you find her," the letter ended, "protect her, even from the truth." A knock at the door shattered the silence. 3 sharp, precise knocks. Rayner stood, heart racing. Max rose instantly, growling low. Rayner drew his sidearm and moved to the door. He opened it a crack. No one was there. But something had been taped to the outside, a black and white photo, grainy, surveillance style. It showed Marlowe at a bus stop, visibly pregnant, looking over her shoulder. On the back, typed in all caps, "You're not the only one who got the letter." Rayner's blood ran cold. It wasn't just about Hollis. It wasn't just about Marlowe. Someone else had received a warning, and someone was watching. He turned to Max. "Get your vest." The dog let out a quiet huff of breath and padded toward the gear closet. They were going back. Because whatever Hollis had uncovered hadn't died with him. It had just begun. The night had not softened. The rain had grown heavier, lashing against windshields and windows alike, a gray curtain drawn across the city's breath. Alex Rayner's hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary as he maneuvered his unmarked vehicle back toward the airport clinic. His jaw was set, mind grinding against every turn of the letter's words, every implication that had unraveled since Marlowe collapsed on that tile floor. The photo, taped to his door, still burned in his pocket. The blurred image of her standing alone, watched. It was no longer a question of whether she was in danger. It was now a race to find out how deep the danger ran. Max shifted in the passenger seat beside him, ears perked. The German shepherd had not relaxed once since they left the apartment, his body tense and alert. He could feel it, too, the shift in the air, the scent of something wrong. When they arrived at the clinic, it was well past midnight. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few security vehicles and cleaning staff finishing up their shifts. The building itself stood hunched against the storm, fluorescent light spilling from narrow windows like tired eyes refusing to close. Rayner parked near the staff entrance and moved quickly, Max at his heel, rain soaking through his collar before he reached the overhang. Inside, the corridors were too quiet. The usual hum of monitors and gentle voices had been replaced with a hollow stillness. Rayner swiped his clearance badge at the clinic door. The lock clicked, but something in the silence made him pause. He pushed the door slowly, fingers tightening on the grip of his sidearm. No nurse at the front desk. No sound of movement from the patient rooms. The overhead lights were on, but flickering slightly, casting faint shadows that seemed to shift without cause. He stepped in carefully, his breath slow and measured. Marlowe's room was empty. The hospital bed was neatly made, her blanket folded over the chair in the corner. The water cup on the side table remained untouched. Her clothes were gone. So were the papers he had left behind. But there were no discharge forms, no staff signatures, nothing logged in the system. She hadn't left under her own power. Max sniffed the air, then moved swiftly to the air vent in the wall. He growled, low and guttural, then backed away, hackles rising. Someone had been there. Recently. Rayner's phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. He hesitated a second, then answered. No voice, only static. Then, after 3 seconds, a man's voice came through, distorted, precise. "She's safer with us than with you, Officer Rayner. Stay out of this. You already failed her father. Don't fail her, too." The line went dead. Rayner stood frozen, the phone still to his ear. The words cut like bone through skin. Whoever had taken her knew everything. His history with Hollis, the letter, the photo, all of it. And they had planned this. He rushed to the security hub, bypassing protocol, and pulled up the internal footage from the past few hours. At 11:46 p.m., the feed showed two men dressed as paramedics entering the corridor outside Marlowe's room. They moved with confidence. One pushed a gurney, the other walked slightly behind, clipboard in hand. Their faces were blurred by caps and masks, but their uniforms were convincing. They entered the room. 90 seconds later, they exited, Marlowe strapped to the gurney, unconscious. No struggle, no resistance. They nodded at the night staff as they passed. No alarms were raised. They vanished from the camera's view in less than 2 minutes. Rayner froze the footage and zoomed in on the gurney. A patch barely visible on one of the medical bags, Ryan. It was a name he hadn't heard in over a decade. A ghost from his service days whispered only in certain corners of intelligence. Ryan wasn't a facility. It wasn't a program. It was a black cell. Off books, unacknowledged, operating under so many layers of misdirection it effectively didn't exist. They were erasers. When something needed to disappear, an asset, a secret, a threat, Ryan ensured it never resurfaced. And now they had Marlowe. He returned home before dawn, soaked and sleepless, mind spinning. He sat at the kitchen table, the letter still spread before him alongside the photo from his door. Max lay nearby but didn't rest. His ears twitched with every gust of wind outside, eyes tracking shadows. Rayner opened a small lockbox in the hallway closet and retrieved a phone he hadn't touched in years. A burner. Only one number programmed. He dialed. It rang twice. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again, Rayner," a woman's voice answered, smooth but edged in steel. "I need extraction," he said. "One target, high risk, immediate." There was a pause. "Send coordinates," she replied. "I'll bring the silence." Cassandra Voss, former recon specialist, now a private ghost. She owed him a life debt from a mission that had gone wrong in Damascus. She didn't forget favors. She didn't ask questions. They met 3 hours later in the back lot of a closed diner on the edge of town. She emerged from a matte black SUV dressed in tactical gear, her eyes hidden behind mirrored lenses, blonde hair pulled into a tight braid. She looked exactly as she had 10 years ago, like someone who'd already done the math and calculated the cost. Rayner handed her the footage, the letter, the photograph. She read in silence. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. "You're not the only one with ghosts, Rayner," she said. "Ryan's not supposed to exist anymore. If they're moving again, someone lit a fire under them, and if this girl, Marlowe, is the trigger, then we need to get her out before they reset the board." Rayner loaded Max into the SUV, and they drove east. Cassandra had traced the stolen ambulance to a decommissioned military warehouse outside the city, listed under a logistics company long since dissolved, but still receiving funding through shell accounts. It was a trap. That much was clear, but it was one they couldn't ignore. They arrived just after sunset. The building loomed like a relic, its steel frame rusted and half swallowed by overgrown weeds. Security cameras disguised as floodlights watched silently. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, rifles slung low, movements lazy but practiced. A third stood near a generator, lighting a cigarette every 18 minutes, exactly as Cassandra had predicted. Rayner checked his watch. 2:13 a.m. They moved. Slipping through a side panel loosened by time, they entered the warehouse's forgotten veins. Inside, the air was colder, metallic, lined with the smell of oil and disuse. Crates lined the walls, marked only with barcodes. Silence pressed in on them like a closing fist. Then, a sound. A voice. Weak. Female. They followed it through the labyrinth of corridors, reaching a small locked room. Through the reinforced glass, Marlowe sat slumped in a chair, wrists cuffed to the armrests. Her head lolled, lips cracked. She looked up, and her eyes locked on Rayner. He moved to the door. Cassandra worked on the lock. Max sat beside the glass, unmoving. Then, footsteps. 2 men appeared at the far end of the hallway, weapons raised. They weren't surprised. They were waiting. "You weren't supposed to find her this soon," one said. Cassandra shot the first man in the leg before he could finish his sentence. Max lunged at the second, knocking his weapon aside. Rayner tackled the taller of the two into a stack of crates. The fight was swift and violent. When it ended, both guards were down and breathing. Marlowe was freed within seconds. "They kept asking about a code," she murmured. "Something my father gave me. But I don't have it. I don't know what they mean." Rayner steadied her. "You do," he said. "You just don't know it yet." They moved fast, cutting through the warehouse's back corridors. Max led the way, his instincts precise. They emerged into a side alley just as Cassandra's backup arrived in a second vehicle. Marlowe was helped into the back seat. Rayner took one last look at the building behind them. High above, in a control room they hadn't seen, a screen flickered. A woman with silver hair watched their escape. Fingers steepled beneath her chin. "She's active," she said to someone behind her. "The child is waking up." And then she smiled. Back at a motel an hour outside the city, they regrouped. Marlowe sat on the edge of the bed, a blanket wrapped around her, fingers tracing the dog tag at her neck. Cassandra checked the windows for signs of surveillance. Rayner stood near the door, eyes on the parking lot. Marlowe finally spoke. "My mother never talked about him. Not really. She kept everything locked away. Literally." Rayner turned. "In a piano," she said, "an old upright. She told me it was broken, but she never let anyone touch it." "Do you still have it?" Rayner asked. Marlowe nodded. "They searched my apartment, tore everything apart, but they wouldn't have found it. It's hidden in the soundboard." She looked up, her voice steady for the first time. "She made everything seem out of tune, but she was the one carrying the melody." The next morning, they left the motel under false names in an unmarked vehicle Cassandra had secured. As the landscape rolled past, Marlowe leaned against the window, her thoughts elsewhere. They had saved her life. But she had brought something much larger into motion, and whatever it wasn't finished. Not yet. The drive into the city passed under the gray weight of an overcast sky. The sun never broke the clouds, and the light remained cold and pale, brushing against the windshield like a fading memory. They kept to back roads, Cassandra behind the wheel, her eyes sweeping side mirrors with mechanical rhythm. Rayner sat in the passenger seat, silent, one hand resting near the grip of his sidearm, the other tapping faintly against his leg. In the back, Marlowe stared out the window, one hand on her belly, the other clutching the old pocket watch that had ticked faithfully in the quiet hours of the motel. Her apartment complex was unremarkable from the outside, brick facade, peeling numbers above the front door, a mailbox unit rusted at the base, but the inside had been violated. The stairwell smelled of stale water and dust, and the moment they entered her unit, Rayner felt a shift in the air. Not fear, not danger, absence. Every drawer was open, every cabinet emptied, every book off its shelf and overturned. The photos had been taken down from the walls and smashed on the floor. Nothing had been stolen, but everything had been invaded. They were looking for something specific, Cassandra muttered, kneeling to examine the splinters of a broken frame. Not valuables, information, storage, code. Marlowe moved through the wreckage slowly, her face composed but tight. She walked past the scattered remains of her bookshelf, past the shredded cushions on her couch, and stopped in front of the old piano that stood against the far wall, covered in a sheet that had remained untouched. Despite the mess around it, the instrument sat unbothered. They had overlooked it. She lifted the cover and opened the panel beneath the keyboard. Inside, tucked behind worn strings and aged wood, was a box. Wooden, hand-carved, its latch broken, the corners scuffed by time and travel. She pulled it free and placed it on the kitchen counter, brushing off a film of dust. Rayner stepped closer, watching as she opened it. Inside were black and white photographs, faded and brittle, showing Lena in her younger years, smiling beside a military jeep, sitting on a bench with a man whose face Rayner didn't recognize, and one photo in particular, Lena and Hollis. It had been taken from a distance, candid. She was laughing, her hand on his shoulder, his head slightly turned as if reacting to something just beyond frame. The affection was unmistakable. Rayner's throat tightened. Among the photographs were official-looking documents in Farsi, folded maps marked with grease pencil, a worn cassette tape labeled only "For her when she's ready," and at the bottom of the box, a small velvet pouch. Marlowe opened it and held up a brass key. Old, heavy, ornate. A number etched into the side, 471. Her breath caught. "I've seen this number before," she said, "in one of my mother's journals. It was written next to a sketch of a map. I thought it was random, but she circled a place in Arlington." Rayner nodded slowly. "It's a box number. Safety deposit." They left the apartment before dusk. Cassandra took the long route, weaving through neighborhoods and alleys, scanning for tales. They stopped only once, at an electronics shop where Cassandra acquired an old tape player. Back in the safe house they had prepared days earlier, an abandoned ranger station nestled deep in the hills. They gathered around the small device as the cassette played. Lena's voice filled the room, aged and softened by analog distortion. "If you're hearing this, it means you're in danger. And I'm sorry. I wanted to protect you from the truth, from him, from what they made us part of. I tried to keep it buried, but I knew someday you would find your way back, because you were born to." Marlowe sat motionless, one hand on the tape player, the other pressed against her thigh. "I never told you what they did to your father or to me. I didn't want you to grow up with that weight, but what's in the deposit box doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you. They'll come for it. They'll do anything to keep it buried. But you're not alone." When the tape clicked off, the room was silent. The next morning, they took a train to Arlington. Public transport was safer now, less traceable. They moved quietly through the terminal, Cassandra several paces ahead, scanning exits and security. Rayner kept close to Marlowe, Max pressed to her side, more companion than guardian. On the train, Marlowe held the key in both hands, her eyes fixed on the blurred motion outside the window. Her thoughts were unreadable, but her face had changed. The girl who had collapsed on an airport floor now sat upright, composed, unshaken by the weight of what was to come. Something in her posture had shifted, not just strength, but clarity. Rayner noticed it too, the way she responded before questions were asked, the way she moved ahead of instructions, as if she knew what the next step would be. The bank was nestled between older federal buildings, its granite exterior weathered but stately. The brass doors opened without resistance. Inside, the marble floor glowed under dimmed chandeliers. The receptionist barely glanced up until she saw the key in Marlowe's hand. Her demeanor changed instantly. She stood, made a brief call, and returned with a middle-aged man in a tailored navy suit. Mr. Lawton. He introduced himself with tight formality and led them through a long corridor to the private vaults. "This box has not been accessed in over 20 years," he said as they walked. "It was sealed under the authority of a Miss Lena V. Ashford. You are her designated heir?" Marlowe nodded. "I am." At box 0471, Lawton inserted a master key. Marlowe fitted hers beside it. The lock disengaged with a thick mechanical clunk. The drawer slid open, revealing a manila envelope marked "Eyes Only" and an antique pocket watch still ticking. Marlowe lifted the envelope first. Inside were documents stamped with military seals, many in English, others in Farsi, surveillance photos, aerial maps marked with red lines across stretches of desert. One image made Rayner step back, a photo of him and Hollis, younger, in uniform, standing in front of a temporary base. A woman stood in the background, blurred but recognizable. Lena. Beneath the documents lay a plastic-sealed DNA report. Marlowe's name at the top, Marlowe V. Ashford. One line highlighted in yellow. Anomalous genetic markers detected. Subject matches Project Helix profile. Cassandra's voice broke the silence. Project Helix. She held up the page, scanning its codes, flipping through the accompanying sheets. Black Ops Biotech, she muttered. DARPA program from the 90s, designed to identify and manipulate genetic advantages. Intelligence, strength, memory retention. They weren't just trying to build soldiers, they were trying to breed them. Rayner stared at her, his voice low. Selective pairing, controlled environments, observation from birth. Cassandra nodded slowly. According to this, Lena had markers. High potential, ideal candidate, but she wasn't the end game. She turned to Marlowe. "You are?" Marlowe stared at the report. Her breathing had changed. Not labored, focused. "They created me," she whispered, "not just raised me, designed me." Rayner stepped closer. "That doesn't mean they get to decide who you are." "I know," she said, "but I think I'm changing. Things are happening." "What kind of things?" Marlowe hesitated. "I'm remembering things I've never lived, places I've never been, voices, feelings, like someone else's memories inside me." Cassandra moved quickly, rifling through the papers, pulling out one final page, labeled Subject 6A, Psychological Profile, Memory Bleed, Shared Cognition, Enhanced Perception, Canine Empathy. Cassandra looked at Max, who sat quietly by Marlowe's side, alert, unmoving. "He responded to her before you did," she said to Rayner, almost like he was tuned to her frequency. "She's not just carrying traits," Cassandra said. "She's carrying access." Rayner turned to Marlowe, the pieces falling into place. "That's why they didn't kill you. They need you awake, conscious, connected." Outside, the forest stirred. Branches scratched against the cabin's windows. Wind pressed against the wood. It wasn't fear. It wasn't peace. It was something in between. That night, Marlowe woke in a sweat. She sat on the edge of her cot, heart pounding, skin flushed. The fire had dimmed, but its heat remained. The air buzzed around her like a silent alarm. She stood slowly, her body feeling lighter, sharper. She could hear the hum of electric wiring in the walls. Cassandra's breathing across the room, the creak of Rayner shifting in sleep. even Max's quiet dreams. She stepped toward the mirror and stared at her reflection. Same eyes, same face, but something behind them had deepened, a focus she hadn't known she possessed. Raynor stirred on the couch and saw her standing there, lit by the flickering firelight. He sat up. She turned to him slowly. "I saw them," she said. "The lab, the other children. I knew them." Cassandra snapped awake. Max rose, ears alert. "You're not dreaming," Cassandra said. "You're recalling embedded data." "No," Marlowe whispered. "I'm remembering." And then, as if answering her, the laptop across the room blinked to life. No wires, no network. Just one pulsing line on the screen. Helix Protocol. Phase 2 activation verified. Cassandra crossed the room instantly, slamming the laptop shut. "They know," she said. Raynor stood, moving toward Marlowe. They've been waiting for this moment, for her to turn on. Marlowe backed away, heart racing. "I didn't do anything. I didn't connect. I didn't click anything." "It was never external," Cassandra said. "It was always inside you." Outside, the storm had lifted, but inside the girl they tried to control, something had awakened, and now they were out of time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore others on the channel. And if it resonated with you, share it with someone who'd appreciate it too.